From the southeastern corner of western North Carolina, this is Folklore. I'm your host, James Hernishin. Back in the dim, dark past of the 1980s, three Canadians who called themselves Rush had a hit song called The Spirit of Radio. I won't play it here, first because the first rule of folklore is play only sounds intimately associated with Polk County, but also because legally I'm not allowed to play recordings without first getting permission or paying for the privilege through an authorized agency. But I can at least read the opening line without fear of repercussion. Begin the day with a friendly voice, a companion unobtrusive. Rush wrote that song in part as a tribute to a Southern Ontario radio station that did its best to support local musicians. That station, CFNY-FM, was a lot like WNCW, which is the only radio station Polk County has, even if we do share it with a significant portion of the southeastern United States. For more than 35 years, WNCW has been able to play music, both local and from just about everywhere else on the planet, because it's part of a national network of public radio stations who collectively negotiate how much they pay musicians through something called the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And I'd say that arrangement has worked out pretty well for all the listeners in Polk County and those in the rest of western North Carolina and neighboring portions of South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, and Virginia. But in July, President Donald Trump ordered Congress to stop funding the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and Congress, including both our county's congressmen, complied. That saved U.S. taxpayers about $1 billion, but it put in peril scores of public stations like WNCW that used to rely on the corporation for at least part of their budget. Plenty of stations are laying off staff now, and some of them probably won't survive. Why would our federal government make life so difficult for grassroots radio? To be clear, it's not out to get WNCW specifically, but it is hoping to destroy public radio in general, largely because of an unfounded assumption that NPR news that most radio stations carry is biased against the president. Here's how the Trump policy playbook known as Project 2025 puts it, with the help of the 11 Labs AI voice machine.
Conservatives will thus reward a president who eliminates this tyrannical situation. Stripping public funding would, of course, mean that NPR, PBS, Pacifica Radio, and the other leftist broadcasters would be shorn of the presumption that they act in the public interest and receive the privileges that often accompany so acting. They should no longer, for example, be qualified as non-commercial education stations, which they clearly no longer are.
The loss of the ability to pay for the right to broadcast music is just collateral damage. As you'll hear in my conversation with Programming and Operations Director Joe Kendrick, WNCW is managing to hang on, for now. But to quote from another great musician, the future is uncertain and the end is always near. And a future Polk County without WNCW is not one of the doors I look forward to opening. Because this station is so much more than just a way for local bands to get some airtime. Joe and I talked in his office in Spindale. Joe Kendrick, welcome to Folklore.
Hey, thank you, James. Glad to be here.
I think it would be best if we started with a quick history of the station.
WNCW went on air on October 13th, 1989, and had been put in place a couple of years before that, perhaps. There was a staff here leading up to when it debuted. It really began in the mid-1980s when North Carolina, the state of North Carolina legislature, realized the need for better public radio service to the western and eastern ends of the state. And there was Public Radio East on the east end of the state and what became WNCW on the western end of the state. There's a good history of all of this on our website. You can go to the WNCW.org website, and there's a history that's fairly comprehensive. But a group of ambitious folks gathered around Isothermal Community College as the home for WNCW, put the tower on Clingman's which is right across from Mount Mitchell. It's almost the highest point on the East Coast where our tower originates. We're up there with a lot of infrastructure. We're part of actually lease our facility for the transmitter from WMIT, the 106.9, the Billy Graham folks. And so you've got these two things with a great elevation to broadcast over parts of 5 states and an ambitious group of people that had a completely different approach to public radio. So they created something that was not a strictly news, not a strictly classical or jazz leaning station. And in that era, it was very rare to have a radio station that was not more or less strictly formatted. And that was part of the genius of WNCW, was the blending of styles, the blending of eras, the depth and breadth of the approach to music, and original music programming. A lot of homegrown shows that started, like from the very first, from, say, Celtic Winds in 1989 with Richard Beard, who is still here today. A lot of the shows weren't necessarily there on day one, but shows like Going Across the Mountain, the Bluegrass Show, Blues for Saturday Night House Party. A lot of these shows have either been there from the start or almost from the start. And that's what we're about today, is a lot of wide variety of especially music programming, but also an emphasis on original programs that are in-house, that are made by people that are either recording it here live on the air or recording it in a studio, live to tape. But we have a handful of other shows that are original shows that are produced outside of WNCW, but their home is WNCW.
What about the news programming? I mean, it was about 10 years ago that you added Morning Edition.
Oh no, Morning Edition has been here from the start. We used to also carry All Things Considered, which is the afternoon analog to NPR's Morning Edition, and that went by the wayside in probably the mid '90s or thereabouts. I think our program director Mark Keefe was the person that steered away from having that much news programming, but we kept Morning Edition up until the mid 2000s, when we went away from Morning Edition entirely in favor of having a music mix starting at 6 o'clock in the morning with a lot of news and features. So we had NPR news headlines plus BBC news headlines plus a lot of original features that we produced, but also some features that we've kept along the way, like the 90-Second Naturalist. So a lot of these features for culture and news and science and whatnot.
Stardate's one of my favorites.
Stardate's always been here. Now, around 2008, we went back to having Morning Edition. So we left aside the music mix in the morning and went back to Morning Edition.
That's interesting, that in a way you're going back to an original formula. And I don't want to get talking too much about whether or not you think that is economically or culturally appropriate or audience responsive, because whatever balance you have, you have a balance of news and music now, and it's I suspect the audience likes it that way.
It works for us. You can talk to any group of WNCW listeners and get different opinions. This is well known to us that there are people that love having that much news, and there are people that wish that we would have something more like a music mix. And then there are some that don't want to have news at all.
Well, considering what the state of the news these days, I can understand why some folks would say the last thing I want is more news, especially when I've got 4 or maybe more NPR alternatives they can tune into depending on where they are in your listener range. But again, let's not worry about whether or not it makes sense to have morning edition, because it might change. But I doubt that WNCW's focus on local music, which is a big part of your brand, right? It's supporting local musicians. I don't think that's going to change anytime.
Very much. You're right on that. And we've got such a great wellspring of talent in the region that we can draw from in a lot of different genres all across the decades. A lot of brand new talent, a lot of icons like Doc Watson or Earl Scruggs. So that is a big part of what we work into our music mix. As a show itself, what we call Local Color on Monday nights, it's a dedicated show to regional artists, but also we'll work in regional music all the time.
Yeah, I don't think I would go more than a few hours before I heard a local musician. Like at least one, like your morning with Martin or Roland, depending on who's on. They're going to play somebody local at some point in their playlists, and so again, that's one of the reasons I found WNCW so interesting, because you do have the ability to find top quality people right here. You're not just putting in someone because they're local. You're putting them in because they're local and they're good.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and this all comes back around to us to sort of encourage and cultivate, to be a place that gives a platform to local regional musicians. That benefits us as well, to be able to be known for that, but to also help the music scene to be able to have a vibrant music community and to be a part of that ecosystem. It all comes back around.
So this is my first question I wanted to deal with, is your perceived role in the community. Like a specific county like Polk has an inordinate amount of good musicians, really. Can you describe what you think WNCW's role at the county level is, other than supplying a source of news? Because again, that's only part of what you do.
Think about this from time to time, like you could call it vectors of engagement, the ways that we plug in with the community. And Polk County, right here in the heart of WNCW coverage, is just a great example. So obviously there's the entertainment value of having the music and the variety of programs that we air. So that's just sort of like the face value of a WNCW. But you go beyond that to also the culture that surrounds that music. So we're not just a jukebox. We're giving a lot of backstory and some tidbits and some updates on where these people are playing in the region and that sort of thing. So there's that. There's just the factor of kind of that companionship of having people on the radio that are there on a regular basis from day to day, from week to week, that you can rely on as being there for you in some sense. They become sort of a friendly voice that people in Polk County and people all around the region can identify with. It's reassuring to have that, especially in hard times or crisis. So when the pandemic hits and the lockdown happens, or when Helene hits and you've got these very trying times, it's especially beneficial to have something that is grounding in the middle of all of that. And we witnessed that over and over again during those times, especially, of people saying, man, I kept my sanity. Credit a lot of that to WNCW, because during all of this, we could tune in to hear that familiar voice, to have that sort of stability on the radio.
Now, this takes it to this other topic I wanted to discuss, and that has the way in which you see your responsibilities as a community radio station after a storm like Helene. Mm-hmm. Now, BPR up in Asheville, they chose to go 24/7, basically emergency news, mm-hmm. for weeks, on both their music and their news channels. You could have done that, although that would have been logistically challenging for your staff. But what you're saying, I guess, is that in addition to the information that people needed in an emergency situation, some comforting background, some cohesion and familiarity was also an important role.
Yes, also a break from all of the extremely bad news. Right, it's there, but it's not there all the time. And I applaud BPR and the other regional news outlets for diving in so deep into really, covering that with all of their resources. And we're not equipped to do that. We have Paul Foster as our senior news producer, and that's it as far as our, real dedicated news person on staff. The rest of us are music hosts or working behind the scenes in some capacity. But we did pivot to giving out as much information all the time that we could gather after Helene specifically, and realizing what, an extraordinary situation we were all in. So every break we were going through as much information as we could succinctly give in a break about how to get help or how to aid others.
Did it change the station in any way, the experience of playing an important role in the response to the storm?
I don't know. It was traumatic in a sense for us too. I don't know if it changed us necessarily long term, but down here in Rutherford County, we were not affected nearly as badly as, Buncombe, Henderson County up there in the mountains. But we saw a lot of damage ourselves. However, just giving that news, just being aware of everything that was going on as part of our role here on the air, that took its toll as well. I don't know about any real changes as far as like long term. I mean, we'll never forget it.
No, let's hope that nothing else comes along that's even worse.
Oh, seriously, knock on wood.
Well, let's talk about something that definitely will change WNCW and every other public broadcasting outfit in the country, because we've just had Congress pass legislation and the president sign it that cuts $1 billion out of federal support for public broadcasting, television, and radio. Now, as I understand it, that worked out to around 10% of your budget?
Correct. So something around $168,000 a year. That number fluctuates from year to year somewhat. It depends on some factors as to what exactly that number is. But that's been the benchmark, is, $150,000 more or less in that range, in the 8 to 10% of our budget range.
Now, you've taken a hit like this before when you lost state funding, right?
Correct. It was worse. In the wake of the Great Recession, we lost something more like a couple of $100,000 a year in state funding, which in 2008 money was more money than it would be today. And we bounced back from that by essentially doubling down on raising money from members and underwriting.
So the question is, can you do that again?
We'll have to. What choice do we have?
Right. Well, here's the question. There is, I think, some people, when they respond to all the disruptions that's coming from Washington these days, they say, well, we're just going to use Band-Aid solutions until the government changes in 2-4 years or whatever, and then we can go back to how things were. Other people are saying, no, here's an opportunity for us to become totally independent of government, so that we don't have to be anxious every time a government like the current one gets into power and threatens or actually follows through on revoking your support.
Yeah, I guess the view that there's the silver lining to all of this, that there's more independence, more self-reliance, self-sufficiency, that sort of thing. Well, we're going to have to be more self-sufficient, and I don't expect that money to come back. I mean, I don't know the future, but the state money didn't ever come back.
Right. Although just looking briefly into the political realm, if the Democrats were to take back Congress, I think there would be a move to restore a lot of the cuts that, not just to public broadcasting, but all across federal government.
There could be.
But you're not counting on that.
I wouldn't count on it personally. That's just my own take.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not expecting it.
So is being independent of government, is that a silver lining?
I imagine that it's good in some sense that being self-reliant, has its advantages. It's not sitting back and waiting for money to come and becoming lazy in some sense.
I know this is a difficult question because I don't think, just like at the international trade level, countries like Canada do not want to be able to extricate themselves from the American trade world, but they're being forced to, because what choice do they have?
Right.
It would be better for us to be able to rely on federal support to get us through difficult times at the local level, for instance. If Western North Carolina goes through an economic period where listeners just can't afford to give the way they used to, you need to be able to rely on more stable funding, long-term funding through the federal government. But on the other hand, it seems like tables have turned now, and the federal government is the one that's the unstable support. So you're going to hope that listeners and your sponsors can come through for you.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, public radio, public media is infrastructure. And, without that foundation, that federal support to your public media, then, how do you view this sort of essential piece of infrastructure? Because it's more than just the music that we play. It's the emergency alert system. In times of like Helene, when people lost power and they lost cell service, but if they had batteries in a radio or a crank radio, they could tune in to a WNCW, to a BPR, and they could find out essential information about what they needed to do on the ground.
Well, that's exactly what I did. I mean, I had a crank radio, and because I didn't have enough batteries in the house, I was not prepared. But you're right. I think public radio is an infrastructure service that communities should want to support. But if that money is not going to be there, obviously you're hoping that listeners and sponsors can make up the difference. Now, you just had a very brief kind of mini fundraising.
We did.
Last week.
It was very successful, and that was incredibly encouraging because we raised upwards of, what was the figure? I've got it written down. It was something like $144,000 in hand that we rounded out the week with. But then there's more money that'll come on as people increased their monthly donations. And so we don't count that in hand, but that'll play out to be more money on down the road. So essentially last week we made up for that 10% loss, which is great. And it's worth noting that we still have a home here at Isothermal Community College. So we do have support from the state of North Carolina, being a wing of the community college and having that sort of support, like having our offices and our internet and everything, is here for us in that sense. So there's a lot of hope. We still have the support of Isothermal, who's firmly behind us. They've got, no plans on seeing us go elsewhere. We're very happy with that. But we've also got an amazing and motivated audience that loves us enough to give us money.
Will it be enough if people like me, my wife and I are, monthly sustaining members, just every year. If we upped our contribution by 10%, and if everybody did that,
correct,
would that be enough?
That would be amazing. And if more people came over to being a member on any level, because the statistics tell you that 10% or less of active listeners of public media are donors that are members on any level. So if you could improve on those statistics, then things would be great.
Every year or twice a year when you do funny drives, I hear that stat that only 1 out of 10 of all our listeners actually supports the station financially. I think, yeah, you got to get that number up. It's so frustrating to know that the 9 out of 10 people are just basically taking advantage of a public service. What can anyone do? What can any station do to maybe get it up to 2 out of 10?
Boy, that's the big question.
Or, I mean, in other words, is it realistic? It's just the way things go. I don't think it's WNCW's unique statistic. This is
it's a psychology question, really. It's how do you get people to adopt a habit?
Yeah, and it's not that expensive to make a meaningful contribution, right? Well, let's talk about then one of the reasons why people might want to contribute, and that is the fact that they get to hear music that they're not going to hear anywhere else unless they spend hours every day curating their own playlists on Spotify or Apple Music, right? Like, I get exposed to music. My favorite Willie Roland show on Jazz and Beyond, because I'm a big jazz fan. I don't know how I would learn about so many musicians if I didn't have WNCW. So that would be my pitch. But here's this problem now. You don't have funding that supports an organization, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which would negotiate the royalties.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about that. You can explain how it works.
Okay, yeah. So that's a murky topic right now, because there's no clear path forward in the wake of the dissolution of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So some of the notes that I have tell us that the fees are paid through January 1st, 2026.
Okay, let's just back up a little bit, because I think listeners need to know that you cannot just play music on the radio for free. The musicians who record those pieces of music and the publishers who put them out need to be compensated.
Absolutely.
For their art.
Absolutely.
So how do they get compensated?
So with public media, the umbrella is the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which negotiates with the performance rights organizations, the BMI, CSAC, ASCAP, those organizations, and collectively they're paying something like $8.7 million a year for the rights, the royalties, the licensing for playing all of the music that public radio and public media is using, and then public stations like WNCW pay into that a portion of what their portion is to put into that pot.
Well, this is a great way of saving money, because one organization does all the negotiations with the publishers.
Right.
So if they're not doing it, you'd have to do it yourself?
Or there would have to be another organization to negotiate all of that and be the umbrella for all of these public radio stations and public media.
Okay, so how is that going?
That's the real murky part, is what's going to happen now. Because, all right, so what I've got says that the licenses have been negotiated through calendar year 2027, but then there won't be a Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and so that is it's going to have to get picked up somehow by somebody, and I'm not sure myself. I don't spend a whole lot of time looking into this. It's a moving target. It's very fluid. But I know that there's going to have to be something of an organization to replicate what the CPB was doing, or else everybody is on their own, and that would be nightmare for everybody. It would be way more expensive for everybody. It would be incredibly time-consuming. It would be fairly crippling.
In other words, the public radio industry in this country, it's especially the ones that specialize in music, was made possible because there was someone to handle all that, right?
Right.
I mean, you'd have to hire someone full time,
Right.
basically, to
Yeah.
make up for that.
Yeah. Carolyn Young, who is an instructor here in the media curriculum, was talking about her experience in the radio. Was it TV or radio? I guess it was in radio back in the day when her station actually did that all themselves. And they only did it for that 1 year before they figured out what a nightmare it was and how much they had to have a dedicated staffer do only that to figure it out, what songs they played, what royalties they owed to whom, etc.
Yeah, I could only imagine how difficult it would be, and especially since it's already so difficult for musicians to extract money for their product these days. Streaming pays next to nothing, and
Yeah, they do get a lot better return from radio play. You know, that's that I don't have it in front of me, but you can look it up, and the payout for getting played on the radio is worlds better than getting streamed.
so this goes back to my suggestion that appealing to people's love of music might be a good way to get them to say, hey, you support WNCW, you're supporting musicians.
You very much are.
Better than firing up Spotify.
That's right.
Yeah.
And plus the fact that we're championing a lot of lesser known artists and people that are from the region. I think that's worth something.
Yeah, I love it when I hear a local musician that I have seen myself play. And you have given, I think, a bit of leeway in the definition of what you consider WNCW style music because people are local, right?
Right.
And so you're kind of expanding people's musical vocabulary a little bit.
Yeah, we ebb and flow as to what really is the WNCW sound, at least around the margins, and it's a work in progress. You'll ask any given listener or a group of people, and they'll say, well, you'll ask, what kind of a station is WNCW? And somebody may say, it's a bluegrass station. And somebody may say, well, it's a AAA station. And they're not wrong, but that's not the whole picture. You know, the whole picture is there's a lot going on, but around the margins, we can work in somebody that doesn't fit that typical wheelhouse with bluegrass or AAA. But if we interpret it and work at it to fit things together logically, or have a thread that has a tie through all of this music, then it becomes WNCW sound. I don't know if I've explained that very well, but there's a lot of leeway in the artistry of what we present as far as a music mix, as far as the interpretation of how these things fit together, because obviously people in 1989 didn't think that jazz belonged anywhere near Jimi Hendrix.
Well, Jimi Hendrix probably would disagree with that.
Right, but as far as a radio format.
Yeah.
And so we do the same kind of thing in myriad ways with all of the many facets of music that we have at hand. And there's some things that we won't play and some places that are more or less out of bounds. But if we work at it, I like to tell people when I train somebody to be a volunteer DJ, like we'll start them out on the overnights, which is where I started. Hark Overnight, the Alternative Radio Coalition, and the edgy indie sort of sound, which is sort of the flip side of the coin to the daytime. It uses the same kind of approach of being very deep and broad. But I like to tell people, if I worked at it, I could put a whole show together in the middle of the day from that library, and it would make sense, and it wouldn't be offensive to people that had never been used to hearing that. So that's the sort of the way that we approach things with our music mix.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I've spent many years thinking about whether this song belongs on WNCW or not, and I guess if I have to ask, then maybe it does. Because if the answer is obviously no, I mean, you know, you're not going to play Taylor Swift mainly because Taylor Swift's got plenty of the other stations that will play her.
Mm-hmm.
But also I don't know, it's just something obvious about a straight-ahead pop sound that really doesn't fit the WNCW mold, right?
Right.
And then there's also, I don't know who said this, some musician said there's only two types of music, good music and bad music.
Yeah.
Right? So, not trying to diss Taylor Swift fans there, but anyway. Okay, I think, we've managed to cover all the areas I wanted to talk about here. Is there anything else you want to say about what WNCW is and is trying to be?
Well, my dream is to always be better and to do more with what we're able to do, to have more on-demand content on our website, for example, like with our podcasts. And well, one example that we have succeeded with that very recently is that we've got on-demand archives of all of our original shows, and all of them are on the show pages on our website, wncw.org, where you can go back through about 10 recent episodes of anybody that's on the music mix during the day, any of our what we call specialty shows or blog programs like the Saturday Night House Party or Arc Overnight, etc. So that's great. Always want to try to do more to meet people where they're at, and a lot of that increasingly is digital on their phones, on the web. But just want to be able to not only continue our mission, but to expand it whenever possible. So, the more original programming that we can get and that we can bring to the world. We've done a little bit of this with some of our programs that are syndicated, that are originated here, that are syndicated elsewhere, like Culture Caravan, which is a world music show, international music-based show, which is carried on maybe a dozen stations now, or an Appalachian Vibes, which is a sort of a music magazine type artist interview-based show that is carried on a number of stations now as well. So the more that we can do that and kind of get out there on other levels, other platforms, other than just what we're already doing on the air and on our web stream, I think that's ultimately where I'd like to see us go.
Well, obviously, as a podcaster, I appreciate the convenience of on-demand programming because people just aren't able to listen while you're doing something live. But live radio is still the core, and there's no plans to change that.
No. That's what we definitely do not want to have happen, is any sort of rollback or cuts to our programs that mean that we lose people that are producing radio here, or we have to figure out ways to skimp on the shows that we pay for that are syndicated, like a World Cafe or any of those kind of programs. And then there's a real possibility that could happen. You never know the future again, but look at what's happening with PBS North Carolina or with public radio stations like WFAE, which are already laying people off. And this is, that's an existential kind of threat that we're facing still. Even with the good news, this is not over.
Yeah, I'd like to actually end on a slightly scary note rather than a positive note, because I think this is very difficult times. WFAE raised a heck of a lot of money in the wake of, and actually in anticipation of the shutting down of Corporation for Public Broadcasting, but they still had to lay off 6 staff. Mm-hmm. That's the station in Charlotte. And the fact that you have not had to do that that's the good news. But this uncertain future just means, and I'll do the job for you, I want to plug WNCW and say people should not have to wait for your funding drives. They should be going online and supporting it. If you aren't already a supporter, become one, right?
Yeah, and businesses too. I mean, that's another big piece of our funding is business underwriting. So businesses that have announcements on the air during the day, or venues that announce artists that are coming to play, those are ways that we have a lot of our funding come in. And for folks that may not have thought in that direction before, we're really looking for you to come on board as well.
All right, so business owners, listen up. Joe, thanks so much again. I've been waiting to do an episode about WNCW for 3 years.
Thank you.
So this has been great.
Oh, it's been great to meet you. Thank you for having me.
All right. In case you missed it, I think very highly of WNCW. I grew up on public radio. I've listened to a lot of public radio stations over the years, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that, in my opinion, WNCW is the best of the lot. I'm not convinced that complete independence from federal financial support should be the long-term goal. Isolationism is rarely a good idea, but it's absolutely essential that listeners step up and fill the funding gap for the next while at least. And I hope that this is something we can all agree on. If you've got some feedback to share or a suggestion for a guest for Folklore, send it to jamesH@folklore.com. Thanks for listening. And now, Siri, PlayStation WNCW.
Carolina, WNCW.org.
So encouraging to hear some familiar names come through. And these are folks that are stepping up again and again for WNCW. But for everyone that's been on the fence, just hasn't made the plunge yet, think about it. Right now is the perfect time. If all of you that have not made that pledge can be a first-time donor, whether that's a sustaining membership, whether that's a car donation, whatever it takes, it doesn't have to be a lot. You can make a big difference right now.
WNCW.org, 800-245-8870. Thank you so much for your support. This is Jimmy Johnny Joe, a little contemporary old time WNCW.